Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Storytelling Chronicles. We're back. Let's go. Hello, everyone. I'm the Bodacious Cowboy with my co-host, Christy Knichel. Are you ready for a special edition of the Storytelling Chronicles? We are. Let's go.
Look out! Pop, it's showtime. Showtime. Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know. I bet they know as soon as we walk in. Showed up. I'm wearing Cuban links. Yeah. Designer mix. Yeah. Inglewood's finest shoes. Whoop, whoop. Don't look too hard, might hurt yourself. Known to give the color red the blues.
Hello, everyone. I am the Bodacious Cowboy alongside one of the best co-hosts out there, Christy Knichel. We're back. It's long way overdue. Christy, how you doing?
Doing awesome. Excited to be back. I was dancing to the music, getting the vibe. Great stuff.
Yeah, and also laughing in the green room, which is great. It's a great way to start the podcast since we haven't been on for 6 weeks now, maybe 7 weeks, something like that. But we have a great show today.
I know. Well, you had a good reason for us not having the podcast, so
we did. We've been so busy. You've been traveling. I've been traveling. I've been doing that relief drive for Asheville, North Carolina, which is fabulous. Going over 500,000 pounds of supplies that I've sent down there so far, and we're not done yet. And I'm still managing that, doing my business, and said, you know what, we got to get back to podcasting and do what's right and share some really good content. How about yourself? I know you've been down to the BCS. By the way, how did you like that?
Oh, I thought it was awesome. It was my first time, but obviously meeting carriers in a format like that is probably the first. Mm-hmm. Just in tune to the amount of carriers that were there, which is awesome. It's always great to meet other brokers and competitors too, but I think just being able to be face to face with so many other carriers out there, ones that we could work with or ones you can, connect them with other people too that can help them. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I did too. And I finally got to meet you and our guests. I've been waiting to meet him for such a long time, as well as yourself, because we've been talking so long. But it was so great to get together with people that you chat with on the internet, on LinkedIn, whatever, and, put a face to a voice, even though you see each other on podcast or whatever. It's great to shake hands, give a few hugs, share some love, and, have a really good time. And I think that we all did.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was great to meet you for the first time, too, as well. And Matt, who was our guest, I just spilled beans, obviously, but he's definitely someone that I've been wanting to meet, and we've been both following as well. So I guess with that being said, let me read a little bit about our next guest.
Sure.
His name is Matthew Leffler. He is the managing member of Armchair Attorney LLC, general practice law firm in Illinois. Matthew provides legal commentary on various supply chain issues and is the host and producer of the Fleeting Conversations podcast. In addition, Matthew has served as a senior leader with some of the nation's most admired maintenance, repair, and fleet management firms. Matthew entered the industry as an attorney defending trucking companies in civil litigation in 2010, but cut his teeth helping and build and later selling his family's maintenance firm, Outsourced Fleet Services Incorporated. Matthew earned his GD from Michigan State University College of Law, magna cum laude, and his BA from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He is licensed to practice law in the state of Illinois, U.S. District Court, Northern District of Illinois, and 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. Matthew is the proud father of Michael, Rowan, Elise, and Elijah, and has been happily married to his wife, Holly, since 2008. That is amazing. Why don't we bring him out?
Let's bring him out. The man, the myth, the legend, Matthew Leffler.
What's going on? Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I am so happy to sit and talk with you guys today about whatever we talk about today.
Absolutely.
We have a lot to talk about. That's for sure. And it's never a dull moment when you are on a podcast. So we are both ready to hear what you have to talk about. And Christy, so Matt is a huge advocate, as we know, with maintenance, pre-trip inspections, nuclear verdicts. I mean, we can go on and on and on. I'm not really sure that we have an hour worth of time. We probably have about 4 hours knowing Matt, because once he gets on a topic, his passion is there. He just lets it fly. And that's no lie.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, why don't you start off, Matt, talking a little bit about how you got into practicing law, and then obviously we talked about your family business and why you're in transportation now and what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm going to go in the way, way back machine. So after my grandfather got back from World War II, he was a tank commander, and he started his own trucking business. So he ran 6 pieces of power in central Illinois, hauling mostly grain. And unfortunately, he got polio in the 50s, and then he went basically paralyzed from the waist down, lost his business, went bankrupt, and then he unfortunately passed away in 1973. But what he was able to do before that was to help teach my father how to maintain commercial vehicles. And my own dad, in 1976, he started working for a company called Roadway. And if you think back to before 1980, there were 3 trucking companies that moved the country. It was Yellow, it was Roadway, and it was Consolidated Freightway, CF. Those 3 trucking companies was the entire business. There was other players, but he cut his teeth one of the best firms out there. And what I knew about trucking when I grew up was it meant that my father was was away for at least 180 days a year. Half the year he was gone. That was what trucking was. And I said to myself, I never, ever, ever, ever want to be in transportation. And here I am. I am a lawyer in the transportation industry. As you mentioned, I went to Michigan State University College of Law. I graduated back in 2010. I began representing trucking companies and manufacturers in catastrophic accidents. And I realized that I'd rather be proactive than reactive. And that's what kind of brought me to the maintenance world. So over the last few years, I've been, at my own law firm. I do some consulting work, and I've worked with some incredible companies. So that's a little bit about my background. And I love to think about this industry from the lens of you don't know where you're going unless you know where you are, and you don't know where you are unless you know where you've been. And this is an industry where history is so very, very important.
I concur, because as they say in the history books, if you're not careful, history will repeat itself, even though we've got the technology and the tools that we have now compared to decades ago. It's still the same type of pattern. You always got to learn something new each and every day, because that's how fast the industry is moving forward. And if you're not learning something new every day, you're going to get lost in the shuffle really, really quick.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so speaking of practicing law, what do you believe are some of the most recent influential nuclear verdicts that stand out to you in transportation? And what does a nuclear verdict mean?
That's a great question. And we're going to have to unpack that a little bit. So first of all, nuclear verdict isn't a term made by lawyers. We don't sit around and go, oh, that was definitely like Nagasaki. That was a Hiroshima style. We didn't talk that way. Nuclear verdict was invented by the industry, and it was invented by the industry to make you think a certain thing. So what we try to do in the world of communication is find words that trigger emotional responses. So nuclear verdict, how we understand it in the transportation business, is any liability verdict over $10 million. So generally speaking, wrongful death is the type of tort that happens, or just negligence that has someone who passes away. And if that verdict is over $10 million, we call that a nuclear verdict. Now, I don't know about you, but if you spend a week or 2 in the hospital, you're going to start seeing those numbers really high. If you destroy someone's pelvis or if you kill somebody, the verdicts are probably going to be in that range of nuclear verdict. The goal of using that term nuclear verdict is to make it easier for someone like me to persuade you that that's an aberration and we should stop it. And it's someone else's fault, that we have to curb the tort. We have to reform the torts. So that's kind of the background of nuclear verdicts. Not a legal term, but a descriptive term used to trigger an emotional response. We also have a new type of verdict. These are much more exciting. These are called thermonuclear verdicts. And again, they're not made by lawyers. We didn't sit around and go, oh, that's definitely an order of magnitude more than the Nagasaki one. These are verdicts that are over $100 million. And those types of verdicts are traditionally incredibly rare. But over the last few years, we have seen these verdicts begin to accelerate. The cases that I had a chance to talk about at the Broker Carrier Summit, as well as DATCON, 3 really, really big ones. There was the case against Werner Enterprises in Texas. We have the case against Wabash in Missouri, and we have a case of Daimler Trucks North America in another catastrophic accident with $160 million verdict. So those are like three of the kind of really big cases we're all thinking about. I can dive into any one of them if you like. I love talking about these things because my goal is always to bring educational aspect to this so that when someone listens to it, they walk away with at least some level of interest, and hopefully I entertain, but really it's about education.
Let's talk about the $460 million one, your prize. Texas,
Yeah.
let's go. What's the latest and greatest on what's going on with that?
Well, let me start with the facts of this case, because it is absolutely unimaginable, this case. I go on different social media places, or I'm on a podcast, or I'm at conferences talking about this. This case is about Wabash, one of the great trailer manufacturers in the United States. And what they did was they made a trailer in 2004. And when they made that trailer in 2004, the rear impact guard, the bumper behind the trailer, was designed to prevent an underride at 30 miles an hour or slower. Now, underride is a very disinfected term. I don't like to use disinfected terms. I like to use the descriptive terms. So an underride is when a vehicle goes underneath the trailer and it decapitates the driver and their passengers. That is what an underride boils down to. And our industry, we put together this law that was making any rear impact guard that was, could sustain a 30 mile an hour or slower would prevent an underride. That changed over time. Today, the legal requirement is 35 miles an hour to prevent an underride. But this case was in 2019, so almost 20 years after the trailer was built. A driver and his passenger were going about 55 miles an hour, and they never stopped. But the trailer in front of them, owned and operated by GDS Express, did stop. And they hit the back of that trailer at 55 miles an hour. Now, these next facts I'm going to say never made it to the jury. And I'll explain why they didn't make it to the jury. But these facts are very important. And everyone who's read this case has heard these facts. Neither the driver nor the passenger were wearing seatbelts. Mm-hmm. The driver had a blood alcohol content allegedly twice the legal limit. He was intoxicated. They hit the back of that trailer and they had an underride event. Ultimately, both the driver and the passenger died, and the motor carrier, the trucking company, GDS Express, went bankrupt about 6 months after this accident. This went to trial, and at trial, it was determined that Wabash, the manufacturer, was at fault under a theory of strict liability. Each passenger and the driver each made $6 million. So the families, the estate of those deceased, each got $6 million. So $12 million all in for compensatory damages. And then we have the punitive damages award, $450 million. And the way that number was reached is incredibly interesting. What the plaintiffs argued was they said Wabash, the manufacturer, knew or should have known that this rear impact guard was not strong enough to sustain an impact over 55 miles an hour. And because they chose not to do that, they were saving money. They made $15 million of additional profit every year for 30 years. So they did the math. 30 years times 15 million gets you to 450 million. And then we saw the number, $462 million. Now, to answer your question, Jeff, what's happening now? This is the part that so few Americans actually understand. That's why I'm so glad to talk about it. Missouri has had tort reform. They have made a decision of how you change verdicts. And in the Missouri statute, the code itself, the maximum amount you can make in punitive damages, punishment damages, is 5 times compensatory. 12 million times 5. That gets you to 60 million plus the 12 million from compensatory. The total liability, if nothing else changes, and we'll get to that in a moment, is $72 million. That is the maximum Wabash is going to have to pay. There's no other way they would pay anything above that, if they pay anything at all. But that is the state of this case right now. If you take what the plaintiffs have said as accurate, 5 million trailers, every single trailer in the United States is defective It is not able to withstand a 55-mile-an-hour rear impact collision. They're not built that way.
Well, that's my point, because you said 35 mile an hour, right? And is there a law that states they're supposed to do the 55?
No. So this is what's so interesting and why this case has really captured America's attention. Because to your point, the regulation is now 35. Isn't that enough? And the answer is maybe not. Maybe the federal limit is what we look at as the bare minimum. Maybe you should have it higher. Maybe we should all have it higher. If it's safer to have it available, maybe you should retrofit your trailers. We don't actually know. I have talked to motor carriers and brokers and manufacturers, and I'll say very clearly, nothing that I'm about to say is intended for legal advice. Don't take legal advice from a podcast. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do, and it's definitely not me. But I would say this. Exercise caution. We have no idea what the appellate courts in Missouri will do. We know a trial court, a low-level court, made a decision that is kind of a bit wonky, but we don't necessarily know what the appellate court will do. So making a bunch of corrective actions right now, changing out your impact guards to something much more robust, might be too much too quickly. But I love safety. I love maintenance. And so I understand why some people are thinking, what in the world are we supposed to do?
So what happens? Let's just say it goes through and they awarded the $72 million, and now they say that, to your point, every single trailer out there is defective. What kind of downtime are we talking about to retrofit? Or, you're going to have to torch them off because they're all welded on there, as you well know, right?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
So how long of a period, how long does it take to do every one of them? And what does that mean to the supply chain?
This is a great question. This is like the parade of horribles. And like, there's nothing that makes me happier than like delighting and terrifying people. Because to your point, what is the retrofit? What is the solution? So there are both bolt-on and weld-on ICC. So that's the rear impact guard. There are different models. There's some that bolt, there's some that weld. The repair is typically anywhere from 3 to 5 hours per trailer. And you're looking at a rear impact guard to sustain a 55-mile an impact, rear impact collision. I don't know that they make a ton of things like that because that's really not something you can test very effectively. But I would suspect it'd probably be between $1,000 and $2,000, and the weight it would increase your trailer by is probably 500 to 1,000 pounds. So you would be talking an incredibly, impossibly difficult challenge of retrofitting 5 million trailers. And just one other caveat I'll note. There have been, I believe, 14,000 documented cases of an underride of a commercial trailer from the rear, meaning this is a very rare phenomenon. It is unfortunate when they happen. Nobody wants these things to happen, but the automobile manufacturers who make the Fords and the GMCs, whatever, they have no obligation to make it so that their vehicles do not go underneath the trailer. It is completely on our industry to prevent people from being careless and smashing into the back of the trailer. So it is a very onerous thing to think about a nationwide retrofit. Perhaps manufacturers will simply have new trailers that have this, and the existing fleets will be left alone, depending on if you have the appetite. It's really interesting.
So how about this, though? We've got one more question, follow up on this, okay? So the manufacturer of the trailers, right, are deemed unsafe. Once that litigation goes through and it's passed and they pay the $72 million, every 5 million trailers out there by every single manufacturer, will they have to replace the trailers on their coin knowing that they manufactured a defective trailer?
That's a great question. I'll say it this way, because this is what makes law so complicated. In the state of Missouri, they may be considered defective. That has no binding authority anywhere outside of Missouri. Now, if you're a motor carrier, you're like, all right, we'll make sure all of our good trailers go through Missouri and put all the old ones around Missouri. That is how motor carriers behave. So that is absolutely a potential consequence of this litigation. I will also note the American Trailers Manufacturers Association and the American Trucking Associations and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce are all watching this case. They're all filing their documents. They will fight this thing tooth and nail in the appellate court process.
So we're way out.
Yeah, we're ways out. We're ways out for like definitive rulings. There's other things we can talk about, but yeah, they're still a little ways off, I think.
Yeah, I just find it interesting that something that's not technically like they had to do it and now they can take it to court and fight it. It just doesn't even make sense to me that this is a thing.
I think what I do to kind of help you understand it better, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. When you make something, your liability is about the anticipated use of the thing that you build. So if you make a rear impact guard, what's the anticipated use for it? People will say, well, it's for dock locks. And yes, they do use them for dock locks, but that was ancillary. The main thing that those things were designed for is to prevent underride. And so the question was, if the anticipated use was to take a smash from the back, and you didn't have one strong enough, and the highway speeds, no one's going 35 miles an hour on the highway. You're going faster. Then you are held strictly liable. If you're a motor carrier, you can use things like contributory negligence. You can actually say they weren't wearing their seatbelts or they were drinking. The manufacturer legally could not make that argument. Over time, they can. The motor carriers can make that argument, but the manufacturer is kind of stuck. I'll use this as a segue to kind of talk about the Daimler case, because this is very similar. So the Daimler case is horrifying, and we'll talk about, we can go back to Wabash, but the Daimler case follows this way. Trucker is in his truck. Another vehicle on the opposite side of the road crosses the center line and is going to collide with him. He makes a evasive maneuver. He turns the truck and it rolls. And the cab of that truck comes down and it hits his head and it paralyzes him from the neck down. And the question was, who's at fault? So he sued the driver for the other vehicle and they settled out of court. But the question that went to Daimler was this: Daimler, you make a seat designed to prevent your body from going up and smashing into the cab. You make a seat, it's an upsell, but you make it. This fleet did not spec the fancy seat. They spec the regular seat. And the jury came back and said, Daimler, you had all the technology to know that there's a safety feature you could have done, and you chose not to. Now, you could say you could sell it to somebody, but you chose not to do it. And the anticipated use of the cab of a truck in a rollover accident is that cab will come and break your neck. And that's $160 million. So what does Daimler do? Does Daimler recall all of their trucks and say, here's the new seat you should use? It's mind-boggling, but this is the nature of what happens. When you paralyze somebody, I'm sorry, it's going to be a lot of money. The future medical care, the pain and suffering, the loss of all the joy that you could have had in your life because you now can't walk anymore. These are expensive. And tort reform, to limit these things, may not really solve the broader problem of we have a man who can't walk anymore because his trucking company chose not to buy a truck that had a special seat. Now we're probably all going to have that special seat, even though rollovers are very, very rare.
Who's the one that told the trailer manufacturers that the ICC bar, or we can call it the Jane Mansfield bar, has to be able to sustain a hit of 35 miles an hour? Because it seems like you can roll it back. Well, I did it according to this guy. He told me that in order to build this trailer and be within safety rules and regulations, I had to put this ICC bar in the back of my trailer to withstand 35 miles an hour. Now, who's the idiot that determined 35 miles an hour was the proper speed that it had to be able to withstand?
This is a really good question. And I can't get into the exact specifics of like the decision of the speed that they should have, but I would look at it this way. Our industry is in constant communication with the regulators. They're not friends, but they're talking every day. And they say, you're going to make a decision to change this thing. That is going to cost me X amount of dollars. It's going to cost me a lot of money. What is a number we can equally agree to? And 35 was the number that both the lobbying organizations and the regulators felt was a safe number. Now, what happened for Wabash, what will happen with any trailer manufacturer, is you're going to say, okay, how much crash testing have you done? Right. What records do you have of other speeds beyond 35? Because if you can show me that you thought about it, then I got you. I got you.
Right.
And I'll use the example of the side impact guards. So maybe as noticed or not noticed, but the side impact on trailers, like those guards, that has been a debated question for decades. So when you're turning a truck and you have a trailer in the middle of the intersection and a car smashes into the side of that trailer, we now have a side underride. Side underride meaning a decapitation from the side of a trailer. There is no regulation today that mandates or requires side impact guards. What we have in the industry are side skirts. These are like skirts that are designed for aerodynamics.
Right,
and
right.
like we have the side skirts because the California Air Resource Board, like a decade and a half ago, said, we're going to mandate everybody have these. And people were like, well, why? And they said, well, we think it helps with greenhouse gases. And they go, well, do you have documentation? They say, yeah, we think we do. The manufacturers told us they do. And if you came into California without side skirts, it was $1,000 a day fine. So everybody got side skirts. But now if you're a trailer manufacturer and you watch this Wabash case and you're like, wait a second. If there's data that we have as a manufacturer, and even though the federal government hasn't mandated it, we can't lean on the feds and say, well, we did what the feds told us to do. Because in this Wabash case, it didn't matter what the feds told them. They followed what the feds told them. And then they got hit for $462 million. So now our industry is saying, should a dry van trailer be $35,000 for a 53-foot van with swing doors, or are we going to have a $60,000 trailer with massive rear impact guards and massive side impact guards? Because who knows what these kids on their cell phones are going to do? And that's the challenge. We have the most distracted society on the planet because we're all watching our phones as we're driving. It's
the
amazing.
next one will be 70 miles per hour, like on a road with the speed limit. And again, I don't know how they can do this when that wasn't a regulation, like that they had to have an impact. And then what about the fact that you said they were twice the legal limit, the driver? And
that's right.
But you know what? It doesn't matter though when you think about that. Regardless of the fact that the guy's stoned, if he's intoxicated, whatever, no matter what hits the back of that trailer, even if you are sane, that has to stop any vehicle in its track without any underride. That's the whole thing about it. It has nothing to do with whether or not you're drunk.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, right. It stops the car from going underneath. That's the biggest thing. Now, let's just take it a little bit further, right? You were just talking, Christy, about the speed limits and stuff, right? You go out to Vegas, out into those things, you get 85 mile an hour standard speed limits out there. So does that mean, oh, I'm sorry, even though that is one of the biggest paths for trailers to go into Sparks or into Reno or Las Vegas, you can no longer drive on that road because your trailer doesn't meet the requirements and the recommendations as stated by law for underride protection. I mean, you can just see this manifesting itself out of control.
You watch the speed regulator debate within the FMCSA, and you can kind of see what they're thinking. They think if you go slower, it's safer for the roads. And maybe that is the case. We don't really know. We know the ELDs incentivize people to speed. And so we expect to see a federal regulation sometime next year, depending on who wins the election. There's an election happening, and those have consequences. But that speed regulator may be something we see next year. And to Jeff's point, maybe the National Highway Safety Administration then says, well, we're going to make the new rule about underride based on the new speed limit for all trucks. There is not going to be a time when you've done everything safe enough. And I want to segue this to talk about the Werner case, because this is the case that every broker and shipper and motor carrier has to understand. This case is tragic. It is absurd. And every time I tell this story, people walk away going, I don't feel comfortable. I'm like, yeah, you're not supposed to. The story goes, a driver for Werner Enterprises, who's brand new. He's been driving for Werner for about a week, going down the road and snowing. He's driving beneath the posted speed limit. In the opposite lane, the opposite side of the road, is a pickup truck, 2 adults and 2 kids. And that pickup truck is going too fast for conditions. Why is it too fast? Because they lose control. And they spin out and they cross a 10-yard median. And within a second or two, they're in front of the truck for Werner. Now, unlike the Daimler case where the driver turned at the last second and spun and broke his neck, this driver goes through. And in that moment, 1 child dies and 1 child is paralyzed. And in the back of the truck for Werner, in the berth, is a trainer. And very few people, I think, in the industry realize this, but when you have a driver and a trainer, they operate like a team, which means one is sleeping and one is working. They are not together saying, this is what you need to do next. It's a team. Now, we can debate whether that's a good solution or not, but our industry does not have the margins to support anything else. And so that's what it does. It goes to trial. And I'm just going to say what happened because it's so bananas. The driver for the pickup truck was found to be 16% at fault. 16. The driver for Werner, who never lost control, under the posted speed limit, and operating a safe vehicle, was found to be 14% at fault. Less than the pickup truck, but I'm not a mathematician. I'm not Ken Adamo or Jason Miller. I don't know. But if I do my math, that's 70% missing. And that 70% went to Werner Enterprises.
Oh, wow.
$100 million against Werner. Now, Werner appealed this. They appealed the case to the appellate court in Texas. And the appellate court in Texas said, that's a great argument. We don't care. Werner is still on the hook for the liability. When you factor in the interest that happens over the course of this appellate period, it's now $130 million liability. On December 3rd of 2024, a month away, it goes to the Texas Supreme Court for oral arguments. And in that moment, the Supreme Court of Texas will listen to Werner and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the American Trucking Association and everyone else who came into that case, and they'll listen to the plaintiffs. And they'll say, why should we change what we ruled? And if you're a motor carrier and you think, what is my responsibility when I have absolutely no ability to control the actions of another person, and I could be held responsible to the tune of $100 million. There's a handful of trucking companies that can survive that. Werner's one of them, but there's a lot that couldn't. And what will the insurance companies do? How will they mitigate this risk? This case should keep everybody up at night because it is bananas. It is the bananas case.
Unfair, completely unfair. And it's like,
Insane.
I don't even know why this happens. Is it because they're that size? Like, who comes to the I just feel like anyone in the right mind would know. How are they responsible in what you just said? It makes me so angry.
I think that and this again, not legal advice. I never given this legal advice to Werner, but this is the truth of things. You don't litigate cases with dead kids. Yeah. You don't. You do that. No one cares what your liability position is. They're going to say this pickup truck had $100,000 of liability or $500,000 of liability. Who can help this family? Who can do anything? This is why we have the conversations with the brokers potentially being responsible. But yeah, that's exactly what it's all about. It's absolutely bananas.
Yeah, it is. Well, with that, we're going to go to our break to talk about our sponsors real quick. So hang on.
Okay, so let's start off with Ty.
Sure. Ty TMS simplifies freight management for brokers, offering an all-in-one platform for quoting, booking, and tracking shipments. Learn more at tysoftware.com.
Brokering, success demands a battle-ready strategy. Ty TMS equips brokers with the ultimate battle station for conquering a tough market. With Ty, brokers gain access to a comprehensive platform where rate intelligence and quote history converge on a single screen. It's not just a page. It's a strategic command center designed to help brokers win. Ty equips your team with all the data they need to negotiate with confidence and allows them to communicate directly with carriers and customers from a simple control base. Revolutionize the way your brokers perform by giving them a competitive advantage with Ty TMS. For more info, scan the QR code or go to ty-software.com/battlestation.
Freight Validate, the ultimate identity and compliance verification system for the logistics industry. Freight Validate empowers shippers, brokers, carriers, and more to ensure compliance and regulations and mitigate fraud risk. With Freight Validate, you can easily verify entities' compliance status and identify potential threats within minutes. Don't risk your business with unverified carriers or brokers. Choose Freight Validate for peace of mind. Learn more at freightvalidate.com and start your verification process today.
Freight Validate, revolutionizing identity and compliance verification for shippers, brokers, and motor carriers with cutting-edge technology. Now, experience the power of voice-activated information retrieval with Siri and Alexa. Hey Siri, check Freight Validate.
Sure, what's the MC number?
387211.
The company Direct Expedite LLC is a broker and is freight validated. Company ownership has completed facial recognition verification. Basic company identity verification, risk assessment, and compliance info has been verified by freightvalidate.com. Please follow company protocols for additional safety and compliance vetting. For more information, please go to freightvalidate.com.
Freight Validate ensures complete access to our state-of-the-art identity and compliance verification system. Speed, accuracy, and savings all in one package. Don't miss out. Upgrade to Freight Validate today. Fraud starts with fraud. It ends with Freight Validate.
Provides transportation factoring solutions to boost profits and increase cash flow for small and medium-sized companies. Contact TAFS at tafs.com to elevate your financial success.
Trucking excellence meets unparalleled service. Enjoy exclusive benefits like our fantastic tire discounts. Need cash fast? Try our 1-hour advances. Plus, we're here for you 365 days a year. Need loads? We have a pro dispatch service. This is why TAFS was recognized as the top factoring company in 2023. You'll benefit from strategic partnerships for enhanced operations. Access business loans and manage your finances easily with our client portal, F2 Fuel Card, and mobile app. At TAFS Factoring, we're more than just a factoring company. We're your partner in success. Contact us today to see how we can help your trucking business thrive.
Yeah.
And we are back.
Once again, to delight and terrify the people of the supply chain.
And which we have. I think we did that very, very well. But you know what? These are the type of things, Matt and Christy, that we really need to discuss, because there's some people out there that just puts a blind eye to this kind, or even bury their heads in the sand and don't really understand the repercussions of what this is going, what happens if these things go through, and what it means to us as service providers.
We've talked about this at the Broker Carrier Summit a little bit, Jeff, but I'll mention this for Christy if she doesn't know. So the national out of service rate for commercial vehicles is 21.6%. That's 1 in 5 commercial vehicles right now on the highway moving freight right now is unsafe at any speed. And the legal requirement for insurance for these motor carriers is $750,000. That number, $750,000, was established in 1980, never adjusted for inflation, never pegged anything beyond, hey, this number seems good. That was a relatively decent amount of insurance 44 years ago, but it has never been raised. And they've tried. I mean, they've tried. There was the most recent attempt was the really well named the Fair Compensation for Truck Crash Victims Act. That did not pass, but OIDA and the ATA both agree they don't want to see rates increase. So part of our challenge as an industry is that we are not safe. Like, we are not great at doing the thing that we're paid to do. And I saw there's a comment here about the reptile theory, and I'll just use like a little brief kind of way to explain reptile theory. One, it's not new. It's the idea is if I'm a lawyer and you're my jury, my job is to convince you that this could happen to you. Because here's the reality. This can happen to you.
Yeah.
There are millions of trucks and trailers on the road right now, and 1 in 5 of them is unsafe at any speed. And most of the motor carriers out there carry insufficient insurance to manage the risk that they create. And so when I'm a plaintiff attorney trying to help you understand why my client had to die, it wasn't because of this driver had a bad day. It's because the pattern and practice of the entity that is moving the freight. And you can see how the clause begin: the motor carrier, the broker, the manufacturer. And each time I ratchet up, each one of those companies has a little bit more insurance that I can tap into. And so when you want to understand the pattern that's happening in this business, it is not a bunch of plaintiff attorneys who are evil, who want to see people die. We don't. What we want is for people to be held accountable for the risks that they create. So again, it's a fun way to think about this stuff. It's really interesting.
So how do you fix that, Matt? Like, how do you even start, like, with fixing some of this? Because like you said, right, there's not enough money to be had to even pay for like more insurance. Like, I know that's the number one thing I hear from carriers, right? All of our rates are going up with all the insurance that we have in particular. So how do you fix it?
It is something that is incredibly hard to admit, which is we need transformational change. This is the type of change that fundamentally alters the way we think of the industry. You have to think about what deregulation did. Deregulation in 1980, 60 to 70% of all truckers were unionized. They were Teamsters. Today, it's a fraction of that. The problems we have in supply chain today are they're not bugs. They're features. They're features of the infrastructure and the relationships that have been built through deregulation. And so if you want to fix it, and I'm telling you, Christy, no one actually does. But if you wanted to fix it, some of the things you could do that would be catastrophic to the industry, but ultimately beneficial in the long run, is require insurance to be higher. That would push out many motor carriers from the business because they're barely surviving now. They couldn't survive if they had to have a $5 million policy. Now, that is not popular. That is incredibly, incredibly unpopular. But for us lawyers, not the plaintiffs, but the defense attorneys, they would love to see this. Because when your policy is tapped out in litigation, the insurance company tenders the policy. They say, here's the entire policy, have fun. And if there's a judgment amount beyond that, your company is going bankrupt. So the path is you have to make it more difficult to be a motor carrier. Probably instead of having one inspection done a year by the FMCSA by a certified inspector, make it 2 times. California does 4 a year. They call them the BITs, the bicentennial inspection of terminals, some random name, the BIT inspections. But like if you did that, you would change things. Now, does it solve it all? Probably not. But it would push out an enormous amount of players in the motor carrier space. And that would force you to get better. The other way, Christy, that gets solved is through no action whatsoever. And that is through automation of the supply chain. Level 4 and level 5 automation of trucks is coming. So FMCSA has already talked about this. Level 4 automation is what we call remote operator. Think a drone pilot. Level 5 is remote assistant. Think a secretary who can pass information to law enforcement. If you have the FMCSA create rules of level 4 and level 5, those trucks cannot have a 20% out of service rate at all. Those trucks need to be like airplanes, 99.9% safe with duplicative safety measures because you can't have it any other way. And then the middle mile starts to compress. Motor carriers who are hauling from the big areas from just along the highways, that gets automated. And that is a way that it gets solved. But realistically, our problems are exactly what they were designed to be. The only solution is transformational change.
So let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on New Jersey, my favorite state, raising their requirements to 1.5 mil?
It's
and
amazing.
All the arguments. Well, we're never going to do business in New Jersey because it's going to bankrupt us. We can't afford that extra $750,000 on top of what we're already doing. What are your thoughts?
I think this is what we're going to see more of. So like it's coming to a place now where I think plaintiff attorneys are getting smarter and I think states are getting smarter. A lot of them don't realize just how dangerous and underinsured most trucking companies are. Shippers are learning this too. Shippers are a big part of the solution. Shippers are saying, I don't want you moving my stuff unless you have $5 million of insurance because I just don't want you to be unsafe. So we are seeing these trends happening. I think the state level regulation is easier to do. And I think people will throw their hands in the air and say, this is unfair, but there isn't really a good legal strategy to overturn it because it's for their own people and for people out of state. It's not discriminatory against out of state operators and big motor carriers. I think that they ultimately benefit from this because the big motor carriers are self-insured to a certain dollar amount and then have massive umbrella policies to take care of anything beyond the initial like self-insured number.
So desperate people do desperate things in desperate times, right? Isn't this an open door, right, for greed? I mean, we heard it all the time for decades in New Jersey, you know, when it comes to crashes and really giving it all. I want to take you, I am going to close your business. I mean, how much of that is really based on greed? I mean, come on, you know, there's got to be a high percentage. When that door opens, they're like, no, we're not just going to take that. We're going for the jugular. We're going to take it for everything that it's worth. And now you set precedents across the land, right? That says if it happened once, now we can do it here, there, and everywhere, anytime we want when an accident happens.
I think what we saw, I make a segue to talk about Convoy going bankrupt. So Convoy, they didn't actually go bankrupt. They wound down a whole bunch of silly stuff, but they were a big broker. And when they went out, a lot of shippers came and said, we're going to pressure test every one of our partners because we are not going to be in a position of working with people that are unable to make their ends meet. We saw an IKEA case where IKEA owed Convoy $500,000 and said, I have an idea. I'll take the 500 grand. I'll put it into a federal court and let the motor carriers fight for what that number is. We're not going to pay Convoy. So if I'm an insurance regulator for a state, I'm like, I keep seeing trucking companies come into my state with not enough insurance. They kill one of my residents. And what am I going to do? Like the families are coming to me and saying, why can't you stop these people from coming in? I'll give you a little story from my days as being a defense attorney. I had a client, a trucking company, owner, operator. He turned lanes. He just changed lanes. He didn't look. And he hit a convertible with a 20-year-old woman in it. And that woman hit a telephone pole. And she broke her back and she broke her pelvis and she broke her legs. And the bills were substantial. It was not $1 million, but it was high. And my client had $750,000 of insurance. And he said, what happens? I said, we're going to tender the policy. He's like, but what about the remainder? They're going to take it from you. They're going to take your truck. They're going to take your house if they have to. They'll take whatever you don't have the money to pay because just because my policy has been, maxed doesn't mean you're not responsible for it. So you might look at it as greed from the regulator's perspective, but really it's the regulators saying enough is enough. You're going to come here. You're going to do what you want to do, and you're going to ultimately cause more problems than I can solve. It's the same argument in my mind as the apprenticeship program. So with driving a commercial vehicle, you got to be 21 to do interstate. Every state in this country, you can be 19 and operate intrastate. You can do stuff in your state. The FMCSA is like, oh, there's a driver shortage. There's no driver shortage. But they said that there was. And they said these little kids can become over-the-road truckers. And with an over-the-road trucker, you're bringing your risk into my house. I don't want that. I don't want the feds to say I can have a 19-year-old kid driving across state lines who wasn't trained in driving at night or driving on mountains. So I like to see New Jersey do this, not because I want to punish trucking companies. I don't. If you just tagged that 1980 law to inflation, it'd be $4 million policies right now.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be that different. But again, it wasn't tagged to inflation.
But I do think that is something that needs to happen. And even as a company, we have a $5 million umbrella on our cargo. I mean, for a reason. And at the end of the day, too, like you said, a lot of shippers are actually making you have more insurance if your carriers aren't covering it, making sure we're covering beyond that. But yeah, it's definitely a big problem that needs to be fixed.
I think go ahead.
Yeah. I was saying you see the insurance rates going up right now. You're in a bear market right now, right? Nobody's making money. As one of my really good friends would say, truckers out there are one breakdown away from bankruptcy. Now you want them to go and pay extra money for these insurance. So one, you're going to push these bad guys out, or the ones that aren't really priority is not safety for them. Number one, they're not going to do it, right? So now the rates are going to go up because now you get the flip. It's a shipper's market, becomes a carrier market because you have less carriers that can charge more. Those will probably be the good guys that really put safety as their number one priority, right? So you can see the manifestation of what's going to happen. So is it good? Is it bad?
The reality is, when deregulation was first pitched to the American people and President Carter signed it, it was because it was going to reduce the cost for goods for consumers by $8 billion in 1980 money. So the reality is, and this is the part that is so hard for people to kind of understand, these issues, it's our fault. It's my fault. I'm addicted to things being here in 2 days and being cheap as cheap can be. The reality is, if you want things to be safer, want them to be better, it will cost you more. There will be less capacity because there won't be as many companies that can survive. And this is the rub. The design of our supply chain was orchestrated 44 years ago. It was designed to be like it is now. And we can hem and haw about it being productive or good or not. For me, I look at it and go, if 21.6% of all commercial vehicles on the road right now are unsafe on average, that cannot be acceptable. It can't be. I talked to an FMCSA regulator at an IANA meeting a few months ago, and I asked him, what is the FMCSA's perspective on this? Like, are you satisfied? And they said, look, we believe that deaths are preventable. And we think that deaths are caused by driver behavior. We do not believe that vehicle maintenance is what drives people to die. And my position is, then let's just make the regulations less. Like, let's just make it so that you can have the airlines rubbing together or have 30 seconds on your tires. Because if you don't care about it, why the hell should we care about it? So I get passionate about this because we wring our hands and we say, never again will we have to pay $100 million for the death of a child. But the reality is, you've built it this way. And now we see you and we know exactly how to tag you and claw our way into your bank accounts and destroy you. And maybe you ought to be destroyed because 21.6% is absurd. And that's average. There's people that are worse than that.
All right. So how many trucks are on the road annually?
So it's a good question. If you're talking like 6, 7, 8, I would say that's probably about 6 to 7 million assets. If you're talking trailers, which is just their own category, that's about 5 million. So I look at heavy duty as class 6, 7, 8. That's big box trucks, not the U-Hauls you see, but like diesel engines, big diesel motors. So
if there's a takeaway from this whole conversation right now, the people out there that are listening, let me just put this into a better perspective. 5 million trucks, okay, out there. 21.6 of them are unsafe. That's 1 in 5. That's 1 million freaking trucks out there that you don't want to be next to. What's the probability of being next to one of them on the road? And you've got your family, Matt.
That's right.
Right, you've got 4 kids, a wife, and you in there, and some guy doesn't want to do a pre-check, and he's got 30 seconds left on his drive wheel, right? And he blows a tire. He comes into your lane and takes out your whole family. God forbid. But that's what we're up against, folks. That's the bullshit about this thing.
Let me add something real quick. So I go to Congress to advocate with the TIA. And interesting enough, we have to talk safety to the Democrats in particular. And I use that same example that what if your family was sitting next to a truck that wasn't inspected and kills your family because it wasn't inspected, trying to get them to even understand. It's almost like until it affects them or someone who has to make these changes, it doesn't get changed.
I'm gonna be controversial. Let me be a little bit controversial here. And I love the TIA. I'm friends with many folks over there. Let me explain first off to Jeff's analogy. Imagine you go to the grocery store, your Walmart, your Kroger, your Mariano's, whatever, and I'm selling milk and I have 5 gallons of milk available to buy. And I say one of them is unsafe. You'd say, Matt, I think you're a pretty bad grocer because I don't think it's reasonable to have 1 gallon of milk unsafe. Now, to talk about the brokers, this is super important. If you look back at the growth of brokered freight over the last 20 years, it's substantial. 6% of freight was moved by brokers 20 years ago. It's like 20% now. One of the reasons why it's so compelling is the arm length transaction and the ability to say, I'm not responsible. So there's two cases we haven't talked about, but I'll talk about them now because I know the TIA is very interested in these two cases. One of them is Miller v. C.H. Robinson that happened in California. It's a case where a truck driver made an accident, killed somebody, and they sued the motor carrier who had minimum insurance, and they sued the broker. They said, broker, you might be able to control price, route, and service, but safety is something you're supposed to be aware of. You're going to be regulated under a negligence theory that you negligently hired the wrong motor carrier. And now a broker can be held responsible. Imagine that Werner case where an owner operator who's making, whatever they have, and they have $1 million policy, $99 million is coming out of you, the broker. That case, the C.H. Robinson case, went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And Miller won. The C.H. Robinson, they lost that case. Robinson appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and they said, Supreme Court, help us. We don't want to be responsible. And the Supreme Court said, that's interesting. We're not going to take it. And then in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, a case called Global Trans versus Yee, same exact set of facts. Broker, Global Trans hires a motor carrier does something dangerous, hurts somebody catastrophically, and they sue the motor carrier and they sue the broker. The broker comes back and says, under F4A, we are preempted from being held responsible. And it goes to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Seventh Circuit says, you're right, Mr. and Mrs. Broker, you're not responsible. And that case got appealed to the Supreme Court again. And the Supreme Court said, no. So now, can a broker be held liable for the negligence of a motor carrier? It is the greatest answer any lawyer can give. It depends. Yeah. It depends. It's incredible, but that's the world we live in.
And it's crazy. It's like, why are we in this transportation industry?
What the hell are we doing?
We are gluttons for pain. This is the most dynamic, chaotic, and essential business in the world. We watch drivers' lives change dramatically over the last 44 years. And we see the rise of these entities that never existed. Like brokers are, I don't like to call brokers transportation tourists because that's not fair to them. But like Roadway and Yellow were back in the 1920s and 30s moving freight without highways, without it's a different world back then. So I love that we get a chance to talk about these cases and understand it. But the reality is, if you don't change the way the liability works for motor carriers, we will get you brokers. The brokers are going to be tagged in these processes. And the Supreme Court right now is very conservative. They would likely say brokers can't be held responsible, at least if it ever gets there. But it's fascinating. It's so interesting.
It is fascinating, which makes me, every time my sales team wants me to purchase assets, I'm like, no, I'd rather not. But in the same token, we do broker freight, obviously. Our niche is intermodal, but we also do over the road and whatnot. But yeah, it's like you're waiting for that day, right? Where something happens and you don't know what the fate of you or the company or anything's going to be.
See, absolutely. The problem here is that brokerages, I don't care who you are out there, all of them, do not sell safety as number one. They do not. It's not even on the list yet. You have to remember, if safety's not first and something happens, your brand, your reputation, and image are on the freaking line. You kill somebody indirectly, would you want that on your shoulders to walk around and saying, I hired this freaking carrier. This carrier went out there, did not do the pre-check because he just forged it or whatever. You know what? I'll leave it to the next guy to figure it out because my HOS, I'm sorry, I'm not going to dig into it. I need to make money because it's bad times out there. Kills a family of 4, I wouldn't want it on my shoulders. Hell no.
I will say, and this is not legal advice, you generally do not want to say that safety is your number one priority, because the minute you say that, and this has been a lot of defense counsels, like look at Scopelitis and others, they'll say, like, don't ever say that. Because what we do as lawyers, we say, it's your number one thing. Let's find 5 examples of when it wasn't the number one thing. So now it's more of a question of we want to follow our processes. So if you're a motor carrier, you're a brokerage, work with your insurance company, your adjusters, your professionals, and say, tell me the process is good enough. And then never deviate from the process, because that's when I get you. That's when I can get my claws into you.
Yeah, we've had that happen where the insurance company is like, what is the process that your team followed? And I totally get that.
So it's deviations when I find liability.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a work instruction that you created, Christy, that you give out and stuff like that?
We have just, so it's a process for vetting carriers in particular, you know, like how you're hiring them. And again, that's a whole nother world, right? Depending on what system you're using, how, you know, because again, you know, I know their system where it's like, hey, you can use this carrier who's graded a certain way, but the next thing you know, if that carrier caused an accident, well, why did you use that carrier? Because they said you could still use it no matter, you know what I mean? It's like there's so much like bad information out there. I think that it's like working, you know, with the right, I don't know, even know what to say, to be quite honest, but talking to the attorneys and
there's no perfect way to vet carriers. That's one thing that every state, no one has come up with the saying, like, if you do these things, you're going to be fine. Like that doesn't exist. It's, we see what catastrophic thing happens. And then we try to find out what your processes are. And if you've deviated them, then we can like, now I can get you.
Because part of the process could be like, don't hire a carrier that's been in business for less than 2 years. They have a minimum of $250,000 insurance. Like, all these different things, like on the intermodal side, it's a little bit different as far as the insurance goes. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's those things. And what is that process that you're going through to hire a carrier that says, hey, this carrier is a safe carrier?
But hold on a second, okay? For argumentative sakes here, right? Anything could happen on the highway, okay? You can do a pre-check inspection. You look at your tires, they're all fine, okay? You don't see any nails or anything. So you're traveling 2,000 miles. Anything can happen from point A to point B by the time you get there, right? So you have a post-check inspection and a pre-check inspection. That would minimize the risk if you're looking for those type of things. Not a PM or digging in and breaking down the engine and doing all those kind of things, but the stuff that is visual, that you can see after a trip or before a trip to make sure that, hey, you know what? You got a little stake there or whatever. You can put it in your tire tread and you can say, hey, I'm at 4 or 6, 30 seconds. Okay, I'm good to go. I can go. Oh, I got this one. And you choose not to, you know, you should have the choice. I did it with my supervisors when I was on that side. My supervisor would walk around and make sure that those pre-chip inspections were done and sign off of them. He knew exactly what he was trained in to do those things. And it kind of said, okay, we dotted the I's and crossed the T's. He did do it. Here's the malfunctions that he saw or the things that needed to, right? We would exchange the trailers if it had a hole in it, or a brake canister was hanging, or airlines were hanging, or the what do you call it? The J-lock or whatever on the airlines were cracked or whatever. We would replace it. We would call up the carrier and say, I'm sorry, but your trailer is not roadworthy. We need it to be exchanged immediately. We will not load this trailer.
It's an incentive question, right? It's like if you are incentivized to do effective pre and post trip inspections, you will catch the things that are deferred maintenance that aren't going to be DOT capable of passing. But we have people who are written up if they don't take the asset. We have people that are forced to dispatch. We have shippers who literally do not care if the vehicle is dangerous. So it is this really interesting dichotomy. So we talk about this at the Broker Carrier Summit. If you go back to the yesteryear and you're a unionized driver and you see something that is defective, you don't have to drive. And if they tell you to drive, your union steward's going to file a grievance because it must be fixed by a mechanic to do it before you can take it. So it's interesting. I think until shippers start being held liable, and I don't think they will for a long, long time, when shippers get held liable for these things, they may change how they view them. The private fleets, the private motor carriers hauling for manufacturers, they know this already. They know all about this. We need to talk about non-competition agreements, which is kind of the bummer for me.
We're going to have your back on that. We got work to do.
Well, with that being said, we've taken up the whole time with all of this, which means you were going to come back for like a second and a third, maybe even a fourth edition. Because I think that, even though it's called Empowering Women into Logistics, I think the most important thing, though, is to get this kind of educational information out there, because some of this stuff I'm not even as, in tune to. And it was very enjoyable to hear all these different things that are going on and just the sides of it. And
I appreciate the opportunity. I might just tell people is like, there's no really right or wrong in these things. There's reasonable arguments for both positions of whether it's insurance or vehicle maintenance, or whatever else. It's really about understanding them and having a good, appreciation for where we have been. That helps you understand where you're going to end up going ultimately.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that.
So we got to fill out our calendar and see when Matt is available for the next 5 shows.
I'm with you, Stacy. Thank you. That's very kind
I
of
agree
you.
because, I mean, to be quite honest, I think this just needs to get out there more on however many avenues you can
Absolutely.
get out there, because it's so important to continue to hear these. And you have so much knowledge. You know, we truly appreciate you coming on. And I think one of the last things before we cut out on this, I'm just going to ask you, you have a beautiful family. So do you think any of your 4 children have the same interest in trucking and supply chain like you do?
Interesting.
Absolutely. I have videos when my oldest, he's now 11, but when he was like 4 or 5, going to my father's shop and running around and looking at the trailers for USF Holland and SEVA and FedEx and UPS and Old Dominion in Pitt, Ohio. And I think of these companies as the companies that move America. And that passion is with every one of my kids, because you have to appreciate how hard it is to do this job. It has never been easy to safely deliver freight on time and undamaged. Never. Driving a truck remains one of the most dangerous jobs, top 10 most dangerous jobs in this country. And yet every day, millions of women and millions of men wake up and they say, I got to go drive. And that is something that is so deeply important that I would love for my kids to get involved with this business, because this is everything. You can't opt out of the supply chain. You are already a part of it, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah.
True. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely love it, and loved having you come on today. We truly, truly appreciate it. I know that this is something so passionate to Jeff as well. So, but yeah, I mean, I guess with the closing, go ahead, Jeff. I'll let you do your famous closing here.
Oh, well, thank you, Matt, for coming on board and spending a lot of time with us today. It was, very good that you did that and took the time out of your day to do so. We appreciate it very much. We want to have you back, like we said earlier. It's an open invitation, so we hope that you will definitely come back.
Anytime. I'd love to.
Yeah, we had like 10, 12 more questions we wanted to ask. So I truly think that's going to be great. But one thing before I forget, is there any advice that you would give anyone out there that's watching? Share that advice.
So the advice I'd give, and this is not legal advice, don't take legal advice from a podcast. I'm going to disclaim that every single time. The thing to do is you have to be proactive. We defer maintenance on our equipment, but we also defer maintenance on ourselves. We defer maintenance on our mental health, our emotional health. And it is so important to be on top of that, because if you defer it today, it doesn't mean it's gone tomorrow. It just means it's worse tomorrow. So if you're curious about your own potential exposure, when something bad happens to you, your insurance company is your friend. They are your law enforcement is your partner. They are your friend in most cases. And then for lawyers, we're not all monsters. Now, some of us are, maybe myself included, but it is important for you to make sure that you are using the resources at your disposal to be the best version of yourself that you can. Don't defer maintenance on your truck. Don't defer maintenance on your family, and don't defer maintenance on yourself.
Love it.
Absolutely. So that ends the show today. Make sure to check us out in 2 weeks for episode 24. I have no idea who's going to join us at that time, but we will have a special guest. So please join us. With that said, have a great week, Mr. Leffler, and we'll be talking with you soon. The Bodacious Cowboy is out. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care now.